So I'm going to talk about some of the work we've been doing at Glastonbury Town Council, and I'm going to sort of focus on community and personal resilience at the end a little bit. We'll see how this goes. So, right. So why, sort of the first thing is why am I talking about this? So this, some of you may know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where there's like certain things we need to thrive, starting with a safe environment, safe society, clean air, water, food and shelter, health and education, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization at the top. So there are those basic needs, psychological needs and self-fulfillment needs. And when someone did a bit of work identifying that actually, as individuals, living in our modern world, we are in control of only the top bit, really. The rest, we rely on community and government and the systems that we are part of. And that's kind of a bit, disempowering. And I have friends who went and lived off-grid, and they can control their environment and their building and their water supply and everything, but not many of us can actually do that. So that's why you guys, town councillors, are so important. If I say, so there are 9,000 town and parish councils around the country, with 80,000 councillors serving 16 million people, with £1 billion of funding between them. So, that's a lot of power. And if COP doesn't deliver, we can. The general power of competence allows the freedom for a town or parish council to do anything, provided it is not prohibited in legislation. So that's something to keep in mind. Glastonbury, so we feel very lucky that we have a town council that prioritises environmental issues, a passionate and active climate emergency group of volunteers, and a diverse and caring community that supports each other, which was very visible during COVID, obviously, as probably you have also experienced in your communities. One of the things, the many commitments that Glastonbury Town Council did was to declare a climate emergency and to set a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030. So one of my roles is to try and figure out how we do that. So this is, first we started by evaluating our carbon footprint of the activities of the Town Council, which in 2019 was 46 tonnes of carbon dioxide.
Is that the council or the community?
The council. That's just the activities of the Town Council, not the community. So that the community would be a whole other thing. So this is where we start. And this is electricity, this is gas, water, waste, and fuel, so commute and vehicles. So by switching to a renewable energy supply, it saved 11 tonnes. Now that's, we're part of that system. The main challenge we have, waste and water, is more challenging, so we can reduce the amount of waste we produce, we can reduce the amount of water we use to a certain extent, but the systems that supply those are less within our control. So the next thing we've done is we've switched our van. We expect to save about a tonne a year by switching the van to an electric van. And gas is the big challenge. As any of you who are trying to decarbonise your old houses will know, we've got a very old town hall with a 40-year-old boiler, and it's listed, so there's limited amounts we can do. So we've appointed a specialist consultant to assess the building and find the most appropriate solutions for it, because that is not as easy as some people will tell you. So it's much more, as you'll hear later probably from Justine, because she's going to talk about her role. but it's not just about carbon, right? So what we're doing is cutting carbon emissions. We're doing this is 5 areas of work that we're working on. So we're starting always by reducing. So for instance, the town hall, looking at how we can use less heating first before we look at how we supply that heating. Looking at reducing how much waste we produce before we look at, and that's, for anyone who talks about the cost of implementing things, that will immediately save you money. If you do something less, if you don't fly, if you don't eat meat, if you don't do, that's a cheaper way to do things than trying to find a technical fix to carry on doing it more. So reducing first. Then we look at decarbonising. So then we look at how we supply things. And I've got a slide on each of these which will show you more detail and examples. So for instance, we've got a repair cafe in Glastonbury. We've got people campaigning for active travel, so using cars less, and as I talked about buildings. So there's a number of different ways, and then we do decarbonise. So that's switching to renewable energy. So when you've minimised your energy use, your waste use, your water use, finding low carbon ways to do that. And as I said, we've replaced a van with an electric van, and it's not a new electric van; it's a second-hand electric van. So we're also reducing by doing that as well. So we're quite pleased with that. The next area is support nature. So you will have heard about you can sequester a certain amount of carbon emissions by planting hedges and trees, which has been done at Herbie's Field near Glastonbury. There's also regenerative agriculture, so you can go beyond that. So if you see here, this is cutting carbon emissions, but then beyond that, we're also building resilience in. So nature, also the work that we do with nature, particularly with agriculture, and as we've heard about, all the amazing work that's being done on supporting ecosystems, services, but also that natural world. So letting nature go take over land and use it and rebalance. Then the next one, because as a town council we have limited direct powers, but we can influence. So then once we're just starting to sort of share what we're doing at this event and some other events. We've got an open day planned on Tuesday where we're inviting people in the community to come along and tell us what they're doing, because there's lots of different people doing different things that they consider to be green, or they may not, that it actually is helping to build that resilience. And also the way we can also influence is to campaign. The town council can write letters to government and to higher levels of government, and the campaigning that the Climate Emergency Group does as well. So getting that message out there, but also through education. A lot of the work, like we just heard about at Carrymore, it made me think, my first memory of being interested in the environment was being at primary school and going on a kind of visit like that to a recycling place or a waste place. So that can have a huge influence on people. And then purchases. So also we can influence through our purchasing policy. Maybe we can't control how things are made that we buy, but we can start to ask those questions. We can make decisions based on buying local or buying something that's less has less of an environmental impact. And then also finances and pensions. So a lot of the financial systems are hugely tied up. So there's a big movement at the moment nationally to shift investment away from fossil fuels. So getting in line with that as well. And finally, adaptation. So there's a lot, there's a lot we can do to technically adapt our homes to climate change. then we can make them more flood resilient and protected from damage. There's also sort of a wider transformative adaptation, and by focusing on adaptation, there's some criticism that if you focus on adaptation, it means you're giving up. you're admitting, but as we've heard today, that whatever we do, even if we cut carbon emissions to zero tomorrow, we have baked in climate change impacts, and as you know, Somerset's on the front line of climate change impacts in the UK. So it's not just about building higher seawalls and installing air conditioning to cope, to protect ourselves. It's also about transforming the systems, and that might mean transforming buildings and infrastructure. It might mean giving up certain aspects, what's it called, controlled, I can't remember, in fact it's on the next page, but also transforming food systems, transforming landscapes, and transforming society as well, and ourselves personally. And there is a movement called deep adaptation. So deep adaptation readies ourselves for the possible collapse of our societies. So that unthinkable idea of what might happen as a result of severe climate change is something that we don't think about, we try not to look at, but it's there in the back of most of our heads, anyone who's aware of the situation. So finding kind and wise ways to support each other and build community resilience is one of the ways that we can tackle that. And also building personal emotional resilience to help us cope with the changes that are coming. So yes, managed retreat, that's what I meant to talk about. So that's where you actually give up certain bits of the landscape and go beyond building those, just the flood, the higher walls, as I'm sure you know. But also it talks about the importance of how we are reliant, because our systems need to be changed, we need to change the way our community, so people coming together like this is exactly the kind of thing that makes us feel more empowered, that makes us feel better able to cope with what's ahead. So I'm going to speak a bit now about feelings, and I'm just raising this conversation. I'm going to barely scratch the surface, but I think it's important to start that conversation. So here, put your hand up if you have experienced direct impacts of climate change, like flooding and so on. So a few of you have. You are worried about the climate crisis. So that's practically everybody. So even if you haven't experienced it directly, you are really worried.
I'm angry.
And angry, right, yeah. And put up your hand if you regularly talk about the climate crisis. So that's actually quite a lot. So in an average room, you'll find a lot of people say that they're worried, but not very many speak about it. It's because they don't feel heard. They're worried that they don't want to scare people around them. And so you're an unusual group, but that's kind of obvious, isn't it? So I just want to read something from this book, because as you might have been able to tell, I tend to ramble a bit sometimes. So it's said really well. There's something I want to explain that's expressed really well in here. And this is The Psychological Roots of the Climate Crisis by Sally Weintraub. So, very broadly speaking, people are reacting to climate reality in two main ways, trying to either avoid it or accept it, and most probably struggling between the two. A friend of mine recently said to me, "The reality can feel unbearable." I agreed. She continued that she must try to bear it or she will lose her sanity. I feel the same. How do we face climate reality, work it through, and keep reasonably sane? Of course, this is not a one-off effort, but an ongoing process. First, I believe it helps to appreciate that we face not one, not a few, but a whole series of shocks. The first being that our climate and environmental news itself is shocking. Then it can feel like a shocking assault to experience the very feelings that group denial protected you from. Shame and guilt may suddenly loom large. A further shock is realising more clearly that most current leaders are heading us to ecocide. Surely they cannot be that collectively crazy. Seeing that they are is very shocking. A further shock involves the collapse of our own omnipotence. That tasks us with having radically to re-evaluate our sense of ourselves. Right. Just a little bit more. We see we are vulnerable, dependent, unprotected, and fragile when we thought we were invincible. Death suddenly feels closer and more real. We see how easily seducible we are, how prey to colluding with corrupt forces. We see we were duped and we allowed ourselves to be duped. That feels shocking too. At the same time, it is deeply replenishing to emerge from a collective psychic retreat from reality to see the true picture. It puts us in touch with our lively entitlement to conditions that support life and make life sustainable, conditions we have already been losing. It leads us to re-evaluate what makes life worth living, and it helps us to make genuine repairs wherever we can. This rebuilds trust. Stepping out of the climate bubble enables us to see strength and beauty in an interconnected system that supports life, see fragility in those systems, and recognise the imperative to respect their limits in the way we live our lives. So for me, I feel incredibly sad and angry and upset, particularly for my children and their children. And this news comes in waves, and every single morning I cry, basically, because it's so heartbreaking. But it's also given me a clarity about what's important to me. It's suddenly a lot of the trivia that my life was full of dropped away. And I know what is important, and I'm going to spend the rest of my days working on that and helping people and making decisions with love rather than with anger, because I don't want the rest of my days to be filled with anger. So we will each of us be different, with different experiences. As you know, some of you have experienced flooding, and I've experienced flooding, and I then after that I hated the rain, and I loved the rain, but I was scared of the rain all the time. So we also have our own individual past losses and trauma, and so we'll all be different. When we hear about the continuously unfolding series of losses, loss of the natural world, loss of trust, loss of governments, trust, loss of the future, loss of ourselves, it's normal and natural to feel fear, panic, anger, sadness and shame. And it's important to acknowledge these feelings, to recognise them in our bodies, because I go around like this sometimes and I think, what the hell is going on? I've got a neck ache, and it's because I need to punch something. And it's important to express and share these feelings with others. Accept support. That's quite a big deal for people like you who give to others all the time. And to listen to others without trying to fix them. Find your way of processing these feelings and practice regularly. I really encourage you to do that. And then specifically about young people, there was there was a survey of 10,000 young people aged 16 to 25 years in 10 countries recently, and that reported that 84% are worried about climate change. And over 50% felt sad, anxious, angry, powerless, helpless and guilty. 4 out of 10 said they felt betrayed and ignored and abandoned by politicians and adults. Now that's the most important thing, because you can feel angry, but if you feel empowered, if you can act, you can do something with that anger, you can do something with that sadness. But if you don't feel able to do anything, which a lot of young people don't, they don't feel they have the ability to do that. There's a really nice publication called Talk to Children About the Climate Crisis, and it lists some do's and don'ts. So do, Educate yourself, act with or without your children, ask open questions, tell the truth, talk about feelings, support collective actions, experience nature, and that's where a lot of what's been talked about today is so important. Connect through school. Don't talk without action. So don't be like the politicians. Don't put too much responsibility on the individual. So don't make them feel like they're the ones who have to fix it. Don't say that everything will be fine, because they know it won't. And don't believe that new technology will solve all the problems. And finally, just a little bit about distraction. So a lot of us will distract ourselves, and so there's two things we do. We either deny but actually I switch between. Sometimes I just have to drown myself in television. I don't drink, unfortunately. Some people drink. Some people, eat. Some people do sport or work, throw themselves into work non-stop. We all do different ways to distract ourselves from these uncomfortable and painful emotions. So just be aware of that and keep an eye on it, because it can be damaging. So, it's okay if it's a coping mechanism sometimes, but it can get a bit out of control. And there's a nice illustration which I won't try and explain, but basically about different forms of delay and ways that we use to cope with the difficulty of this, but it's in a kind of humorous way. And that's where a lot of, anyway, otherwise I'll go on. So finally, this is just a quote from Jen Bendel from the Living in the Time of Dying. Millions of people are suffering right now. It's worse than we were told. We are now in danger. We must do all that we can to try and slow the problem down. And we must also do all that we can to help each other through this. So, thank you. Thank you.